Howdy. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another show. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different in that I'm not going to be indulging in my Darth Dawkins derangement syndrome, as he likes to call it. I am instead going to be following my weird fixated brain down the rabbit hole of a 5-year-old video. And just to illustrate how boring this one's going to get, this is from Apologia Studios, Jeff Durbin's channel. I've done one review on Jeff Durbin's stuff before. I don't think it was very good. Did not get a lot of reviews or a lot of views. I don't expect this one to either. But I am going to set up this one because I've pushed forward about 13 minutes into this one to kind of set things up and give my reasons for why I'm reviewing it. And then because there's lots of, basically, long story short, there's lots of opportunities for me to veer off into random tangents on politics, theology, philosophy. So yeah, it's a target-rich environment, this conversation. The other reason that I was interested in it is because it's interesting to hear people talk about some of these kind of like culture war issues in America from 2017, which is when this is. So Trump is president. He has been president for very long. And obviously, this is before the Dodd's ruling at the Supreme Court. It's before any of the justices that Trump appointed, kind of the conservative takeover at the Supreme Court. So it's interesting to hear these guys kind of talk what their rhetoric is like here. So other than that kind of nostalgia to it, the basis of this video is the guest on this particular show is Jamali Maddix, and he is a UK comedian. And he had done a couple videos, or I think a couple shows. He's been in a few British TV shows, but he did a documentary for Vice TV, which the link for that documentary, for the website for the documentary and those episodes, is in the description for my video. Jamali did the video Hate Thy Neighbor, right? So they sent him over to the United States, and he was interviewing various individuals in hate groups. And the one that seemed to get him a lot of attention, or at least caught Jeff Durbin's eye, was the piece or the episode that Jamali Maddix did, where the segment on Black Hebrew Israelites, right? And they really liked it, right? So that being said, and I'm sure they probably, I'm sure like when Jeff Durbin and crew watched it, they failed the outsider test of faith, pointing and laughing at the BHI people. Like, can you believe how wrong they're getting this? But that aside, they were interested in this, so they invited Jamali Maddix on, and he went on the show. So that's where they're starting. And Jamali Maddix is kind of interested in, or at least he's stated up to this point. This is 13 minutes in. They've chatted. They did some early show stuff. And then Jamali Maddix kind of introduced himself as a comedian, that he's been involved in some of these shows, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they kind of got into this idea like, okay, well, what do they kind of patted him on the back for doing the BHI segment for Hate Thy Neighbor. Durbin mentioned something about, we almost didn't have you on here because the title is Hate Thy Neighbor. And of course, that's not Christian. We never hate our neighbor. To which I'd have to say, well, Westboro Baptists, I mean, you might want to talk to them. Or Jesus is Lord, or rebuke and reprove. He believes that hate can be godly. God hates people, so should you. So I'm still waiting for the day that rebuke and reprove just opens his own branch of the Westboro Baptist Church. So Jamali's basically asked him at this point, kind of set it up. He was like, well, I'm kind of interested, being from the UK, where I'm from, the topic of abortion and abortion rights and the right to life and all this other kind of stuff. It's a very different debate. Where I am, the people that I hang out with, being that I'm from London and I'm in entertainment and a comedian and that kind of stuff, I hang around with different people. So now that he's here, on the other side of the Atlantic, he's talking to, Americans about it. It's a feistier issue over here. Why? What's the objection? Right. That's how this has gotten set up. So he's put this kind of question to Durbin, and Durbin is about to kind of launch into. Can you call it mansplaining when one man is explaining something to another man? Because it sounds like mansplaining. Maybe I'm giving a spoiler away. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that, but it seems that way. But that's kind of where this launches into. So I'm going to shrink myself down. make some room here. I think it's interesting that this particular video has the context thing from YouTube about what abortion is. So you know that this one's gotten some attention in the past. Abortion Health Information, National Library of Medicine. An abortion is a procedure to end a pregnancy. It uses medicine or surgery to remove the embryo or fetus and placenta from the uterus. The procedure is done by a licensed healthcare professional. Just in case you were wondering, right? They got the definition right there. And then, just in time for Jeff Durbin and company, Jamali Maddix excluded, to kind of just completely screw that definition up. So let me say hello to a few people here in the chat. Scott Duke, hello. Jenna, good to see you. Josephus Rivero, good to see you. Maya, good to see you. And happy birthday. It is Maya's birthday today. So everybody wish her birthday. She probably didn't want me to say that out loud, but I did. So my channel, my rules. Jody Wheeler, good to see you. And by the way, happy birthday again, Maya. Sorry for making it the butt of a joke. It's probably not very cool. Hogtie, good to see you. Spooky, Megalite, Trude, who am I missing? 830 to Awesome. JL Warren, Bridge of the Divide, good to see you. Good video yesterday, by the way. I caught that premiere. I think that was yesterday. Losing track of time. All right. I think I've got you all. Yep. Oh, except for Mr. Lumpkin and Peter Guns, who wishes Maya a happy birthday. All right. So now that I've said hello to everybody that I think is in the live chat and we've got this thing going, I don't expect too many people to be here because I'm pretty sure that Drag is still live, and I know we have some overlap in terms of viewers, and I think he's reviewing a Shanny and Rev thing. So yeah. All right. So context set up. People said hello to. Let's get into this. Here goes Jeff Durbin. Jamali has already asked him. I'm kind of curious about this abortion issue. Lay out your case, and here Jeff goes. As usual, let me know, folks, if no sound happens.
And interestingly, someone like Donald
Trump. Let me turn that down and slow it down.
What bothered us initially is I grew up hearing about Donald Trump. I was born in 1978. So, I mean, my whole life, Donald Trump's been on the news and television. Everyone knows who Donald Trump is. So I knew what Donald Trump had believed before. And so when he started running for president, he started coming out as pro-life and saying the things that he was, I was very leery myself personally because I didn't know if I could buy it. Mm-hmm. And at this point in where he's at today with what he's not done concerning the area of abortion, I felt like my concerns were warranted. I don't think that it was a genuine commitment to ending the slaughter of children in our nation, to doing anything about abortion. It's interesting too, especially.
So Jamali shifts a little bit. So right out of the gate. So what's he doing? He's prefacing this politically with Trump, like, I was a little bit skeptical about Trump anyway because his previous stance on these things, he was a registered Democrat, didn't even really give mouth service to the issue of abortion, and if he was, it was to say he was pro-choice, which he did. Jeff Durbin is a Gen Xer. So being a Gen Xer, having been born in 1978, he's grown up at a time where he's been able to internalize a lot of right-wing talking points for years. And so he should know by now that the general rule of thumb for Republicans was to talk the culture war, but then cut taxes for wealthy corporations and billionaires. That's generally how they ran, right? Their policy was deregulation and the cutting of taxes, usually on the highest earners, right? Roll back that JFK nonsense when actually it was to continue the JFK stuff. JFK as actually one of the first ones to kind of embrace trickle down and lower the income tax on the top brackets. And Reagan kind of followed suit. It's weird. I don't know that they gave JFK credit for that, being that he was a Democrat, but whatever. But they ran that into the ground, and normally that's what they would do. They would, usually if you look at Republicans in the last, probably since really about the 80s, if you watch them, whether it's a first term or 2-term Republican presidency, usually what happens, first term, they usually try to juke the economy with tax cuts and deregulation, excites Wall Street, business gets a little bit of a bump and a boom. And then depending on the mechanics of the economy at the time, if they make it into a second term, that's usually when they start talking about quote unquote social welfare reform, and that's when they or entitlement reform, as they started to change it, because you're entitled if you paid into Social Security, and the government will be damned if they're going to pay you back under Republican leadership. So. And then they usually start to kill the economy with that. All the while they're doing this kind of stuff, this kind of 1-2 punch. It's sort of like playing this teeter-totter game with the economy. They're usually talking about Satan turning your kid. Satan is going to make your kids violent with video games. Satan is turning your kids away from Jesus with violent music. Satan is getting after your daughters because they can take the birth control pill, or they can get an abortion, or blah 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 blah. Culture war, culture war, culture war. That was the rhetoric that came out of them, but they rarely did anything substantive to stop it. And Durbin has come up in this environment. He's been raised in this. So it's not surprising for him to say, like, you know what, I was a little bit skeptical about Trump. You should be. And everybody was. Everybody was skeptical because Trump is a lying piece of shit. And he was always duplicitous about this. And it was pretty transparent that the reason he was shifting Republican was because he could stoke that base. And he kind of figured out that his charisma worked on a certain segment of the Republican base, and it worked on them enough that the rest of the Republican base followed suit, and they were going to listen to him. And he knew how to play the game. He knew how to talk the culture war stuff, and then schmooze the business stuff on the side. So this is sort of where he's getting to. The most important point, though, other than setting that up, just because I think this is going to come up later, because this kind of informs, I think, Durbin's kind of hardcore right-wing Gen X sensibilities when it comes to how he embraces certain things like libertarianism and other political philosophies, and how that plays into what he feels about abortion. But he's already started off with the most important bit, I think, for this conversation. He has called abortion. Keep in mind the context definition is right there under the video. Still, he's called it the quote-unquote slaughter of children, right? That's going to happen more.
The tail end of his campaign, you saw like Donald Trump using a lot of the pro-life rhetoric, pro-life language, talking about overturning Roe versus Wade and putting judges in that would end Roe. But now here we are. What are we now? 6-7 months? 7 months into his presidency, and it almost seems like radio silence from President Trump on the issue of abortion. So we were very concerned ourselves. It just seemed like it was just a big.
If you think of this using it for populist sort of just to get people to vote for him.
Yeah, who do you need to vote for you? You got to get the Christian vote. Yeah, that's huge. You got to get the evangelical.
Only if you're a Republican. If you're a Republican, you absolutely need it. If you're a Democrat, you can use it, but if you're a Republican, it's absolutely essential. Especially it's really helpful. It turned out in primaries. To get it. If you're going to win the primary, you got to win the base. But it's turning out now with Republicans that it's getting a little difficult. If you appeal to the base too much, you can win the primary, but maybe not the general, because you end up isolating, the non-foaming at the mouth people in America. I agree with this, Jenna. How weird to look back at recent history. Yeah, it seems like when you look at the way it played out, Trump and company moved with. The Federalist Society didn't mess around. They were quick to get lists to Donald Trump. These are the judges you need to start appointing, and not at the Supreme Court either, because a lot of people get confused by that. District court, circuit court, any of the federal court positions that the president is responsible for appointing, they were pushing ideologues on that. It seemed like for a while during his first. I think it was his first year, maybe it was into the second year, it didn't seem like a news cycle went by without hearing at least one story about a potential Donald Trump nominee for some court position got dropped or got pulled back because, by the time they made it to some kind of hearing, a confirmation hearing, it turned out that they were incompetent. Some of them barely passed law school. I think one person hadn't actually passed a bar exam in any state, was never licensed to practice law. I think they put them for, but they were like a right wing ideologue, and so the Federalists they were on like the tier 3 list of the Federalist Society's jurists to watch or something. Just bizarre, really weird stuff. But here he is saying like, oh man, it's just it's seven months and it's like radio silence. They moved really quick to get some of those people in there. The Federalist Society had his ear, bent it, and made sure to get some really wacky judges in those courts. And the interesting thing about this is like, this is going to come up. Put a pin in that comment. Like, Donald Trump at this point in the conversation has been in office for roughly half a year. 7 months, right, according to him. And he said it's been radio silence on abortion. Oh, shucks, right? What's a Christian to do? Make a note of that. Keep that in the back of your head for later.
Vote.
Yeah.
You got to get the conservative vote, and here are the key issues for the conservatives, the evangelicals. You've got abortion, pro-life, and so I think that Donald Trump latched onto that and made promises that I don't, at this point, believe that he has any commitment to actually see through.
Why but do you think that's due to the political system? Because I mean, to sort of, if we're talking about like, and I know you believe from a biblical perspective, but if we're just talking about the political system we live in today is democracy, and sort of this sort of a structural political system. You can't just change a law tomorrow. You know, we have to go through certain systems and certain facets to get to there. So, do you think that he has intentions to do it, or do you think that he's fully just like totally uncommitted to it? Like, do you think that should be his goal every day, is to wake up and to try and end abortion?
Yeah, I think that's so you got these major issues of injustice that I think we should address with like an immediatist mindset. We should immediately stop the slaughter of children, right?
Okay, so he's doing it again, right? And this I want to point this out now before I lose track of this. So there's a real problem with language like this. Well, for many reasons, but the biggest reason that there's a problem with this is that this is a rhetorical trick that does not. It can work if somebody doesn't catch it early enough, but I want to lay this out, and I don't want to belabor it too much because it'll get super boring. But here's where this goes wrong, and this is wrong from Jeff Durbin's perspective. If he ever watches this, I don't think he ever will. I don't think he would care. If you, as a pro-lifer, big quotes, and anti-abortion, really they're just anti-birth control, right? They're anti-birth control, at least to some degree, in most degrees, but they're anti-birth control. You have an issue with some of these procedures, right? And you want to talk about this, but one of the things that you're really tired about, I don't know if Durbin's complained about this, but I know people like Ben Shapiro have, and other people that I've run across, they don't like it when the pro-choicers, or the pro-aborts, as some of the Christians call them, come out and argue for abortion procedures that they think are fringe. The 2 to 4% or whatever that occur in the cases where women are having to have a late-term medical procedure to save their life, right? Or in the cases of rape and incest, they'll even itemize those ones out and say, no, that's not what we're talking about. They usually fail to bring up that the reason that that's being brought up is because somebody's trying to suss out what it means for the Christian when they say abortion. Define your terms. Are you talking about abortion, the medical procedure, or are you talking about elective abortions where women are exercising their right to birth control, and we're not talking in circumstances beyond emergency situations or situations involving assault or incest? And usually you can't get a clear answer from them, right? So they resent that this hyperbolic language gets used in one way or the other, but then they couch that and then turn around and say, well, it's the, quote, slaughter of children. Here's why that's wrong for them. If, in the same way that the killing of a person in a home invasion is not a murder, right? You wouldn't call it that. Now, it could be a lot of different things, but it could be manslaughter, it could be self-defense. However it gets ruled, it's not murder. Not all human deaths are murder. So you can't call, if you exaggerate those things into that scenario, those definitions start to break down. And the case of abortion automatically applies for these guys too, because if you have one situation where let's say you have a Christian mom who wanted to be pregnant, has a child, and the pregnancy goes wrong, and she's in one of those medically rare situations, unfortunately not rare enough, but rare, where the choice that she needs to make is fairly straightforward and ugly. The pregnancy needs to be terminated, and they've caught it late because the pregnancy is not viable. It's going to definitely kill her. It will possibly kill the baby. If not, we're talking about an unviable fetus at this point, or an unviable, possibly so damaged, or, a special needs kid at best, severely disabled at best, right? These are very rare circumstances, but this could happen, right? And so the medical recommendation is, look, you're still young, you're still healthy. If we terminate this pregnancy, you have a chance to do this again. But right now, if you don't, carrying this pregnancy to term will certainly kill you. Is that the slaughter of children? No. Is it an abortion? Yes, it's the termination of a pregnancy, and the medical procedure still fits, that definition fits. So you can't say that abortion is the slaughter of children. You just can't do that. It doesn't fit, and this guy's doing it. So now that I've gone into that goofy explanation to lay that out, the reason that I did that is to say this. The reason that people use rhetoric like this is to get somebody like Jamali to now defend not abortion, not birth care. If Jeff Durbin can shoot straight out of the gate and rush right to the front and say it's slaughter, it's murder, it's murder, then he thinks by doing this, and he does this with, I think, anybody he's ever talked to on the topic, he thinks that he's putting everybody on the back foot because now they're in a position where they have to defend the thing that he has framed as demonstrably, unequivocally, undebatably evil. It's just horrible. Right. And in a way, he's already kind of won by doing that. Right. The easiest way to do that is to simply say, yeah, you guys are just against birth control. You really just have to do it as simple as that. You just play their game and make it about that. You're hyperventilating and overreacting about birth control, which is something you clearly don't understand. And I think that you might be hyperventilating and overreacting about birth control because you hate women, or because you have some insecurities about your own sexuality or something like that. But there's something going on here. Why would birth control scare you? Why are you standing there with some? No. It's about the murder of children. Well, I already gave an argument for why the termination of a pregnancy by medical doctors, which is technically still an abortion, wouldn't be murder, even in Jeff Durbin's lights. So if he's using terms like slaughter of children or murder of children, he's lying. He's just lying. He's just being dishonest. And I think he knows that, right? But the idea to rush ahead with this rhetoric is to force the other person to put them in a position, a dishonest position, because that's not their burden, is to put them in a position, now, take this pro-choicer, now you defend something ugly. That's it. That's all he's doing.
Like if somebody said, like, well, how do you want to end the Holocaust with, Jews being killed? Do you want to do it over a period of, 30, 40 years? I would say, we can do that immediately. Let's do that quickly.
But we didn't. Right. And comparing something like that to the Holocaust and saying like, oh, well, if it was something like this going on, you'd want it done immediately. Yeah, you'd think so. But we didn't. We didn't. That's a really bad example, right? There were plenty of people. There are people to this day that doubt that it even happened. I'm not one of them. YouTube algorithm, please don't cancel me. But, maybe don't compare a medical procedure to one, first and second degree murder, because those medical procedures aren't. And if it's not the procedure, if it's women choosing to do this selectively, now you have to try to show that that is somehow tantamount to murder/slaughter. And then maybe don't also compare that to the position a government took during a time of war on a section of the population they deemed inferior. Also, not cool. This is just gross equivocation, and it's insulting to any of the victims of the Holocaust, and it's insulting to women who actually have to make real adult decisions about birth control. They don't get to sit here and grow a beard, a fancy beard, and pontificate about this as if they're a prophet.
But in terms of abortion, in terms of how the United States government system works, you have a system of government that was essentially created from Geneva.
Mhm.
I mean, the most popular study Bible in the time of the American Revolution was the Geneva Study Bible. Calvin's Geneva produced so much.
Hey, here we go. He gets into something kind of interesting here, but it kind of spirals away. Michael makes a good point here. Michael Deaton, facts don't care about your feelings. Let's see, blinked out on me. Goes on to give extreme emotion-driven and emotionally expressive language to argue for literally every position they have. Exactly. This is the point, right? So, and I think Jeff Durbin has used that term, or at least been favorable towards that term, and his politics align with people who will do that. Well, facts just don't care about your feelings. That's actually slightly, you have to invert that. Feelings are facts. That seems to be it. If God has declared it slaughter and therefore it's wrong and therefore you shouldn't do it. Yeah, well, God didn't declare it slaughter. You said it was, and you can't think it is. He really can't. Jeff Durbin has to force himself into this ideological position. All you got to do, you only need one example of one mother, one wanting mother, a woman who wanted to have her child, needing to have a medical abortion, a terminated pregnancy in order to save her life. And as soon as you get that one definition, past, present, future, you've got that example. It's not slaughter, it's not murder. And if you go and say it is, Jeff Durbin, you are lying. You're just lying. And you're engaging in feelings noise, as people on the right used to call it. I don't know if they still use that phrase, but that's what it is. This is a lot of virtue signaling and feelings noise coming from a guy who is more aligned with people in a political sphere that like to burp up the phrase. Facts don't care about your feelings. Right.
Of what we see in the American political system and governmental system. So we have checks and balances, of course. We have a process through which the people can get representation and they can hold their government in check and accountable. However, we also have the part of our system that allows for a lesser government to oppose a tyrannical government, right? We have the ability of somebody who, say, a sheriff or a local city or governor to say to a higher government or to a cousin government, I'm not following that, I reject that. Great example right now, it's perfect, is, say, Washington and Colorado. Federal government says no marijuana, right? It's against the law, it's against federal law. Well, what these lesser magistrates have done in Colorado and Washington is they followed what is legal in our country, and they've said, we don't agree with that law, we're not going to obey that law.
Nope, that's not what they're doing. Evening, Pat. I am watching a 5-year-old video from Jeff Durbin. He's talking to Jamali Maddix. So, and they're going to be getting into a few things here. But right now, I mean, the framework for this is going to be like an abortion discussion. But now Jeff Durbin is starting to get into his idea about sort of like the legal tradition. And I'm going to try to be careful here because this is not my area of expertise. But the thing that he's doing here right now is getting dangerous. So what he's just said is like, okay, so what we have this standard. He seems to be re-representing checks and balances. So what you have is you have a system, right? And they've been called this lovingly, the laboratories of democracy, the 50 states, right? And they pass different laws and things like that. But there's an interesting factor about this. When the federal government passes a law, right, and it's federal, it generally applies to all the states. When that's passed, the states have to follow that at minimum. They can amend the law to be a little bit more strict than what the federal government goes with normally in most areas of law. What they usually can't do is be less strict. They can't reverse it and become like what he's trying to say. Well, Washington and Colorado basically told the federal government, we're not going to follow this. We disagree with that. We're not going to do that. That is not what Washington and Colorado have done. That's not what they did. It is still enforceable in Washington and Colorado at a federal level to go after people with medical marijuana. What Washington and Colorado do, and this is why this is always a political hot button, even though it's largely just sort of tolerated at this point in lots of different states, the state's not enforcing the prohibition. And then they've carved out exceptions for where it can be deregulated or permitted. It's sort of like creating a no-go zone or a red light district. That's probably the best way to think about it, even though there isn't really a geographical cutout for it. There's certain groups of people can get it in certain states with medical cards, and other states where they're doing adult-oriented, kind of adult recreational use, if they've done that. It's a carve-out for the state to not prosecute it. So if you get stopped by a statey in one of those states and you possess this and it's within certain legal guidelines, the permitted tolerances, they will not enforce the law against you. They're not going to do that. They're not going to arrest you. If you get caught by a Fed, they can still do that. So it's more of a jurisdictional dodge than anything else. It is not Washington and Colorado flipping the Feds a bird and saying, I know you say it's bad, we say it's good, so jog on. That's not what's happening. I mean, one could argue that in the spirit of the law, that's sort of what's happening, but that isn't it. It's up to the states to enforce this kind of stuff within their jurisdictions. And if the states have come up with ways to where they have discretion, all law enforcement agencies have discretion, from municipal, county, to state, to federal. They have discretion and they have jurisdiction. They need to be careful with it. And given that layering of law enforcement, there is discretion to not always enforce the laws, which is kind of how the medical marijuana exemptions were born. And then they've kind of extended legally out into the adult recreational use, where the state basically tolerates certain limits and is kind of regulating it like alcohol. Now, this probably should get extended onto the federal government, and hopefully one day it does, but it has to change things with the FDA and scheduling and all that kind of stuff. And it's probably less complicated than that. But this philosophy that he's trying to point out, where Washington and Colorado just declared it good despite what the Fed said, is not exactly what is happening legally. And this is important because this is not going to be the last time in just this, in the relatively small section that I'm going to be covering in this video, where Jeff Durbin and company represent something legally very, very poorly.
And so we're going to legalize marijuana in our state.
Mm-hmm.
I think they had every right to do that. And I think it was completely right to do that from their perspective for their state. A lesser magistrate can resist in that way. And our government system allows that. But in this case of abortion, from our perspective, Jamali, abortion, Roe versus Wade is not a law. Mm-hmm. Our system of government doesn't give the Supreme Court the right to create legislation. So
Right, but they didn't do that with Roe v. Wade. Here he goes again. Okay, well, there's no law that says you can. Well, the basic process of law is that you don't normally pass laws allowing people to do things. You usually pass laws to tell people what they can't do. You pass laws to prohibit certain actions that you want to prevent. Otherwise, you'd be at law writing all the effing time. It doesn't make sense to do that, right? Because I don't have a law. There's no law that says I can eat an ice cream cone while waiting for the bus. Lock me up, right? No one's going to make that argument. So he's already on absurd grounds. This is like arguing with like a 10-year-old who's figured out like sovereign statehood or something like that from a Reddit chat or something. So that he's already off on the wrong foot here. The other issue with this legally is that what the Supreme Court did was actually much stronger than passing a law. Is there a law, and this is what I would argue with Jeff Durbin, is there a law that allows you to own a gun? And he'd be like, well, the Second Amendment. Wrong. The Second Amendment is not legislation that was passed. It is an amendment to the Constitution. It is part of the Bill of Rights, and it is a right. And what the Supreme Court decided in Roe v. Wade was that abortion, the right, was a right to do it. It was part of the 13th and 14th. It was a recognition of, I believe, the 13th and, well, the arguments, I believe, in Roe centered on the 13th Amendment, and I think in the case that followed it centered on the 14th, or maybe it's the other way around. But that was the decision. So it's stronger than this. This is a massive straw man and a huge switch. Well, there's no law that says a woman can have an abortion. You're right. Instead, there's a Supreme Court interpretation that says women have the right to it. So now how are you going to legislate against it? What these guys are asking for is they want the government to legislate against another branch of the government that declared something a right.
Our constitutional system says that that it is up to the Congress to legislate, right? Not to the Supreme Court. So we see in 1973 that Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court gave a court opinion based upon false premises.
No. Oh no, not Durbin. What up, everybody? Hey, AJ. Yeah, that's right. Durbin's here. It's arguable that it was a false premise. There's different ways of looking at this, but now he's already starting to couch this. Look at the weasel words. Well, they gave an opinion. No, they did not. They rendered a decision. A Supreme Court decision enacted. All right, that interpretation then translated out to extending the understanding of abortion as a procedure being a woman's right. And it was limited, right? There was a limited scope to it. There were obviously things the states could do to limit the types of pregnancy terminations and abortions they could have, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of language in there, right? But a lot of this was argued for on libertarian grounds. The Roe case is largely argued on kind of this philosophical ground of libertarianism. The government doesn't have a right to get between a woman's decision about her birth control when she's making this in planning with her doctor. Every libertarian should be for this. Keep that in mind. Every libertarian that actually kind of claims those kinds of things, most libertarians nowadays, especially in the United States, are basically just fascists, lazy fascists.
They said that what's in the womb is potential human life. We know biblically and biologically speaking, that's false. But they had a decree that we believe this about abortion. And so all the states have essentially bought into a lie, and that is that Roe versus Wade is actually a law, and it's not.
No one believes this. Jeff Durbin is talking out of his ass. None of the states, quote unquote, bought into this lie that the Supreme Court passed a law or that a law exists. That didn't have to happen. The Supreme Court rendered a decision, and the interpretation meant that that abortion is a right as fundamental as the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. No legislation need be passed. It's about, and it was argued on the grounds that other rights that we argue for, things like rights to privacy that we would expect in other circumstances, if they apply here, they apply for abortion. So Jeff Durbin is not even close to getting to what Roe v. Wade was about, and he's not even close to understanding how it was, what the implications of the decision really were. He's just not, now he's in conspiracy theory territory. This is fundamentally incorrect and wrongheaded.
So any state in the United States now could criminalize abortion immediately at the state level by saying we reject Roe and we're going to hold to the laws we have, even in some cases, in place today. So a great example, Jamali, is in...
Right. The problem with doing that is that even in Texas, when they attempted this decision, they had to farm it out and use it in a Weasley way because the state can't do that. The state can't initiate some kind of program and say, you know what, the feds decided this, we don't like it. Right? This is not the same as weed, right? The government passed a law. The feds didn't pass laws that you can't smoke weed. We decided, here's the bird, and we're just going to do what we want to anyway. But here's the trick. None of the states passed laws saying that weed is legal, right? Almost all the legislation from any of these states acknowledges that the federal government has still classified it as a Schedule 1 substance, and it's forbidden. Right, but for the purposes of either medical usage or adult recreational uses, they grant certain things out of it. Right, different states have different language. They try to finesse this in different ways, but that's law versus law. A state can't turn around and pass a law. Durbin would not tolerate this if the state of Connecticut decided, you know what, we don't acknowledge the Second Amendment. No one in Connecticut is allowed to own a gun. He'd lose his mind. Why? Because the Second Amendment's a right. It's been determined by precedent and Supreme Court decisions, right? There's no law that was passed that said you can own a gun, but there's plenty of precedent and Supreme Court stuff, especially recently in the 2010, I think it's the Maddix case. That case enfranchised the right to own guns. It changed the interpretation. So instead of being about a militia, it's about individuals. That's being held up that way. So I don't know. So he's completely misrepresenting this entire thing. This is, and the weird thing is that this is I really do think this is a combination of blatant lying and just abject ignorance, and willful ignorance about this, because there's better information about these things. He does not understand what he's talking about.
In Arizona today, there's a current law on the books that criminalizes abortion. It's never been changed, never been altered, nothing's ever, it's current on the books. And the reason it's not actually upheld is because we're under the false assumption that Roe versus Wade did something to those states' laws when in fact it didn't. So we would...
It's a right. Of course it altered. That's the reason why in a state like Michigan still has a law on the books banning abortion, but it can't be enforced because it violates rights recognized by the Supreme Court. That's the reason that legislation still exists. It's still there. They didn't have to, a law didn't have to get passed in order to stamp that thing out, and that law didn't go away. The law for Michigan is that it banned abortion, it outlawed it, and it stayed on the books. It was one of the reasons that there was a lot of concern about it, especially in this last election cycle. But it didn't disappear because the state just believed a new law existed. It was recognized as a right, and the enforcement of laws like the Michigan 1931 law couldn't be enforced without violating the rights of American citizens. So they get thrown out anyway.
It would actually be of the perspective that we don't need to work to overturn Roe versus Wade because it's not a law. What we need to do is have state governments uphold their legal right as lesser magistrates to resist the opinion of the Supreme Court.
They can't. Not when the Supreme Court has made a decision that it is a right. When they make a decision that enfranchises the rights of individuals, and then a state, it doesn't matter which of the 50 or even how many of them, decides that they're going to go in opposition to that and pass laws that specifically disenfranchise individually recognized rights, it won't hold up. You will get sued to oblivion and back. Durbin does not seem to understand. This isn't even the grounds for how they've been trying to work this. They realized these people, people in his circle, knew that the only way to get this to move forward was to get justices in there to revisit Roe v. Wade and pull it out of there. And now these guys are running with this crap about states' laws and states' rights. Oh, we just want to keep it at the state level. This state can pass it this way, and this state can do it this way. The problem with doing that is that eventually it ends up going to the Supreme Court for bigger decisions. And when it did in the case of Roe v. Wade, the decision was not that to uphold the law in the state or whatever. The interpretation was that it was a right, and it enfranchised that for every individual, everybody. And when you do that, a state can't turn around and say no. They're going to run into trouble, not only from the federal government, but from the individual whose rights just got disenfranchised by some state that just decided, I don't like the implication of that. So Durbin is essentially talking about like a calico dystopia of a country where each one decides what it's going to accept and defy, regardless of what are recognized rights for individuals. So it would be interesting to see him attempt to run a country. Like I would be interested in seeing him run a role-playing game where he just has to like come up with consistent rules for a fantasy society.
And uphold their state laws.
Just like marijuana laws.
Right, just like marijuana
Just like
laws.
the government.
No. Not just like they're not just like marijuana laws. The marijuana laws are decisions by states not to enforce the laws they have on the books, or to revoke certain provisions on them, or to lessen the penalties. But they still have to accept the fact that the federal government has denied them. They have to accept that. I cannot believe these guys are this. I mean, well, I can. This is incredibly ignorant.
Are ignoring the federal government because of marijuana.
They're not ignoring it. They're choosing. They are opting out of enforcement. There's a big difference, guys.
Sorry to cut you off. Do you think that it should go down to a democratic vote of? Because if we're going to break it down to state level, say if we're talking about America, we're breaking it down to every state as an individual country, just because it's such a big country.
Right.
So we're talking about individual states.
That's how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Right.
So do you think that each state should vote on the law? So say if Arizona don't want abortion, and everyone's voted and it's got a higher percentage on votes, no more abortion. But then New York State, it overruled that they want to have a legal abortion. Do you think that the government should still get involved in New York if they want legal abortion?
I think that it should go down to states themselves to govern themselves. As a matter of fact, the government system in the United States was built in such a way as to be a republic, right?
Oh, good. Okay, so now he's going to get into talk about a republic. So, Wilberforce, I did at you with a link to the StreamYard. If you want to come in and say anything about this, given that you're a civics teacher, which is a rare thing these days, yeah, please come on in. If you don't want to join live, also not a big deal, but if you do want to, please let me know, or just jump on in. I'll let you in right away. If not, if I get anything wrong, definitely holler at me in the comments. And yeah, I agree with Pat on this. The funny thing is these people are this ignorant. This is why being able to pass simple civics class test is so important for an informed citizenry. I agree. I really do. And thank you, Richard Madsen, by the way, for the shout out for Wilberforce. I hope he does come in. But if Wilberforce does not want to do it, don't do it. It's totally up to you. I get if you don't want to join live. So now he's going to, so like, essentially what this guy was talking about, what Jamali was like, okay, so you're okay with the idea that like over in Arizona, it's illegal, but in New York, it's fine, right? And I think Jeff is probably going to respond with that. Basically, he's okay with that. And then I'm going to let him lay out like his talk about Republic, but then I'm also going to explain why any of this talk coming from Christian nationalists about the idea that it's cool that abortion is bad in Phoenix, but okay in Manhattan. No, it's not. not for them.
So the way you described it is perfect. Like these almost individual countries in a union, like what they meant when they said union, they didn't mean what we have today, where it's really a federal government really running everything. They meant this is our thing, right? We're all individual sovereign states, but this is our thing. So I do think the states have the right and responsibility just to say, this is what we're going to do. And I do believe, Jamali, I think
that kind of got chipped away with activists for Second Amendment. Because the Second Amendment, a lot of the Bill of Rights, when they were originally crafted, at least according to my understanding and my studies on this, a lot of them were based on the idea that they were built for the states. So things like the federal government not passing laws about religion, not establishing a religion, a federal religion, that didn't mean the states couldn't. And some states did, in fact, do that because their constitutions did allow it. And so they tried this. The problem was when you had that kind of setup is that as these rules, as these rights started to go from the differences between what the federal government can do and what the state government to do, this other category started coming in, and it was what an individual can do. And whether they were protected by these certain kinds of rights. And that's where they get the idea of, I believe they call it, being enfranchised, right? Those rights being enfranchised to the individual. Right. The Second Amendment was one that, according to the Supreme Court, for over 70 years of its tradition, wasn't something that applied to individuals. It had nothing to do. You could own a gun. The Second Amendment had nothing to do with your right to own guns or your capacity to own a gun. And it had nothing to do with your capacity to defend yourself. It had nothing to do with that. The traditional take on the Second Amendment was about states' rights to operate and maintain a militia. Right. That was the point of it. And then it became enfranchised recently. 2010 was the case that really made it so that the Second Amendment, according to a Supreme Court decision, enfranchises the Second Amendment for individual citizens, not just states. That complicates things quite a bit. And so this notion of saying, oh, well, we'll just roll it back so that we've got these 50 countries with all these very, very different rules, and then they're just sort of united in the fact that they're all kind of allied. They thought about this. All Jeff Durbin has to do is study the distinctions or study the debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists to see the pros and cons to the stuff that he's talking about. What he's essentially talking about is a confederacy. And there were arguments, and I think good arguments, for why it won't work and why it can't be maintained, why it won't last. The implications of a confederacy of the kind that he's talking about won't work. And if you need help understanding that, or if Jeff Durbin needs help, there's one great example that I can give as a fact: the American Civil War. Hello, Wilberforce. Good to see you.
Hey, howdy there, Jefferson. I think this is the first time we have spoken verbally.
Yeah, it is. So good to meet you formally and, sort of face-to-face. I'm not on camera, but...
I mean, as close as it's going to be.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've seen my face in other videos. So, let's see. Somebody mentioned Jill in the side chat, and I got distracted. So,
good Lord. That was literally my first venture onto this platform, like this whole thing. I went on Mark Reed's channel, and Jill and I got into it over, okay, well, how do you know which translation of the Bible is the right one?
The Bible interprets itself, sir. Right.
Well, you have to look at all of them.
Oh, okay.
And what he really meant was you have to find the translation that looks the best for the point you're trying to make.
Yeah, you cherry pick, Yeah. So far, is there anything that you got to say, like in response to what Durbin's laying out here, or in response to anything I'm getting wrong? Let me know if I'm getting.
No, I think by and large you're kind of on point. The interesting thing with the Second Amendment, though, is yes, it was in fact so that local communities could mobilize the militia, right? Mm-hmm. But it's still a community thing. It's not some, Hollywood lone badass with a huge arsenal of AKs and howitzers in his basement.
Yep.
That's not what they were talking about. at all.
And the idea, I think that, you know, and well, I think that for me, the thing that got really, and I'm not anti-gun, and even, well, I mean, I'm kind of anti-gun. I don't own any myself, but I mean, I enjoy shooting them. I don't think that people should own. I don't think every American needs a room like Schwarzenegger had in Commando. You know, where just
right. Well, and that's kind of the whole thing. And so when you're looking at laws like that, right? When you're looking at amendments, when you're looking at all of that, the thing I am a gun owner. I have several guns. Because I like to shoot animals and eat them.
Yeah.
But
they're easier to eat if you've shot them first. I found that out the hard way.
Although it's a little less entertaining. It doesn't make for as interesting a story.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I bet that, dear.
Yeah. I mean, look, the idea that having an AR-15 is going to somehow protect you from a 21st century authoritarian government, you're out of your head.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and just the idea of arguing the self-defense thing. It's like I've tried telling people, like, look, if the Second Amendment was repealed, not only would you, one, still be able to buy guns, you would also still be able to use lethal force with a gun to defend your life and defend your home. Those don't go away just because the Second Amendment disappears.
More importantly, you're more likely to get killed with a gun that you have for home defense than you are to kill an intruder.
Yeah.
Like, and I look at that. So, I mean, I'm a single empty nester, right? So I have a fairly small place because I'm a minimalist. I have a big, nasty, medieval looking hatchet. And all my guns are in a safe at my dad's house because he has somewhere to store them.
Right.
If you break into my house in the middle of the night, you'll be met by naked, angry Wilberforce with a huge, ugly, nasty hatchet. Right? And if that doesn't make you go away, a gun was not going to change that.
No. Yeah.
Like, it just wasn't.
To answer Richard's question, did I try to eat a live deer, moose, quail? No, I didn't try to eat them or bite them, but I did once. I did once punch a swan. It was a swan or a goose. I was a kid. It bit my hand. I punched it in the beak.
It was probably a swan. They're mean little bastards.
Yeah, he bit my hand. I was trying to feed these other ducks and geese and stuff, and he came up to me and bit me right across the hand. So I punched him, and my parents were shocked because they were like, "Why did our 9-year-old son punch a swan?" It was kind of weird. It did nothing to him. I'm lucky that I walked away without, the thing beating me to death. But
I hear you. Repo Sandman should probably appreciate this. We were talking about, Washington and Colorado as, weed capitals of the country. Just drinking THC infused soda here. I love my state. It is truly wonderful.
Yeah, and I mean,
except for Lauren Boebert, but yeah.
Well, every state's got their share of nuts.
That's true.
Yeah, like animal abuse confessions. Yeah, I should have pointed out. Yeah, trigger warnings to anybody. Please don't rat me out to PETA. I was 9 at the time when I and that swan drew first blood. So anyway, let's get back into this.
Swans are mean.
Yeah, he was a dick. He was trying to. I had like a handful of bread and I'm breaking it up, and he's trying to go for like the whole thing. He's just gonna take it, and like he was beating up the other ducks and stuff. He was an a-hole.
Yeah.
So
he was a dick. He was a Darth Dawkins of aquatic birds.
So much goose hate here. Yeah, talk to that swan, Judy. I learned it by watching him. Okay, here we go.
Right.
I think that if you, in the United States of America today, I think if you said, put it to a vote, let's let each state vote, I think that you would see abortion banned in virtually every state except for the known liberal ones. Yes.
Yeah.
Now that's funny that he brings that up because I don't know, given that this was 5 years ago, I don't know what Jeff Durbin's reaction was to the now infamous Kansas vote when it was put up for a vote there, and it was like
the Kansas liberal thing is just that's weird to me. Because like the only reason the right wing has any say whatsoever is because of the way the districts are drawn and because of the Senate.
Yeah.
Like, that's the only reason.
Well, it's like when they try to show the map, they show that, well, if you show it by county, it's almost solid red except for the coast and things like that. And it's like, yeah, but if you show it based on population clusters, it's a lot more mixed,
It's
and you
pretty significant difference.
Yeah, the representation is really kind of a problem. But yeah, this idea is like, oh, okay, well, I think if they put it to a vote in all these states, they're just going to vote it down. And it's like they did in Kansas, and it didn't do that. It went exactly the opposite. Yeah. Yeah, and it was like, and it wasn't even close. It was like 60-some%. I mean, it was just.
Yeah.
I mean, if you beat a political opponent with margins like that, it's called a blowout. Like, I mean, the only people that ended up voting against it were just basically, you kind of ossified, like, no, no birth control at all. Those are the ones that are going to show up for that. The ones that think that condoms are witchcraft. The vast majority of people are like,
I mean, they are.
Yeah. I'm like, I mean, they're
terrible.
But the idea that these that I think this is just kind of charming that he's kind of given that prediction, and even Jamali, his reaction is like, really? You really think that? No, I don't think so. I mean, this is a kind of a classic kind of conservative trope, like, oh, well, if you just let these states do whatever they want, the state's going to be as red as an apple, except in communist California and Nazi New York. That's just how they want you to look at the United States. And it's like, yeah, no, Kansas was, deep blue.
It's not actually like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, and there's plenty of people there that are going to be super, you're going to end up talking to people in Kansas that are like, if you take my guns, I'll rise up and I'll form my own country, but when it comes time to vote for something like birth control, which is what abortion fucking is, they're going to be like, we want to be able to do that. And I want my daughter to live in a country where she has the ability to do that. I don't want a guy that looks like he's cosplaying as either a member of ISIS or somebody from the Bible telling my daughter that birth control is murder, is the equivalent.
Cheers to that. As a father of 2 daughters, one of whom is gay, I'm like, no, all of that is bad. Like, just no.
So let's play forward here a little bit and see, because he does get into, he puts out another example that's just equally weird.
Are you quite libertarian in your political approach?
Very.
Yeah.
I think that if you took like the law of God and you applied the general equity of it to today and said, let's make our system look like what this is, it would look very libertarian.
Yeah.
It would look very.
Yes. Preemptively going after Midianites and Amalekites is very libertarian. Every libertarian would believe in those preemptive.
If there's one consistent thing about libertarians, it's that they support the military-industrial complex. Because I remember Ron Paul being all about that.
Yeah, this is just real. I question now Jeff Durbin's commitment to the Mises Institute and any other libertarian groups out there
or rational thought.
Yeah. Although, I mean, Mises is more the Austrian economics thing, but it overlaps with libertarians, so that they all want to be like, well, Arizona's got a silver economy and Nevada's got a gold economy, and Pat's loving that law of God as libertarian. Yeah. I don't think there's a lot of like, I mean, let's just look at it this way. When Phineas stabbed the guy for having sex with a Midianite woman, that automatically, like, he automatically lost his libertarian card, right? Because they're like, dude, what the hell? Holes is holes. That's the libertarian motto. I don't think these guys quite know exactly. Like, they haven't rolled deep with some libertarians, the ones that are like, I want to own guns. I want to own.
By and large, would be pretty pissed off at the idea that you're not allowed to eat cheeseburgers.
Yeah. Like about the time you tell me I can't have an eagle to eat for dinner, I'm going to go out and get all the eagles and eat nothing but eagle.
Right. That's the first thing I'm going to do.
that's the libertarian mindset, right? Like, you tell me not to do something, that's the first thing I'm going to do.
I'm about to go way off track, so I'm going to just shut up and we can continue.
Hold that thought then.
Very libertarian. Yeah. But I think that
part of like libertarianism as well, like freedom of choice.
In a sense, except libertarianism. This is where libertarianism dies. Well, libertarianism dies because it's got the right ideal of personal freedom and personal responsibility and self-governance, right? And small, limited government, that kind of stuff is like, in principle, Absolutely right.
Can you pause it for a second, Jefferson?
Sure.
Okay, so he's talking about libertarianism being all about self-governance.
Yeah.
In the context of what?
Yeah.
Like,
the other thing that these guys always fail, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but in a political ideology thing, the idea, like these guys always go limited government equals small government. In other words, you have hardly any regulations or anything like that. That is not what limited government
not
meant.
in the least.
Limited government is really kind of grounded in the notion of things like habeas corpus, where the government has, it's upon the government to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're guilty of something. They can't just go and say, hey, you're an enemy of the state.
Right. It's about limiting government powers, right?
Yeah.
But it's limiting their reach as well.
Right.
And what people like this jackass are talking about, they want them to be able to reach real deep where they want them to reach real deep.
Yeah.
And everywhere else, nope, you have to let me, discriminate and burn crosses and God only knows what else.
Right. And it's odd to me that, like, I mean, well, it's not really odd to me, but this he's like, well, here's what he's going to say why it falls short. Like, oh, I'm for it because of these reasons, even though they don't entirely line up with libertarianism, and they're kind of based on bad cliches and bad takes on libertarianism. But here's what libertarianism is missing.
Ultimately from Christian worldview to have that kind of idea. However, where libertarianism dies and it will never get off the ground is it doesn't have an objective moral standard.
Wrong. Libertarianism does not work from a Christian perspective because God is declaring things right and wrong. It is not declaring things. Libertarianism only works in a society where you have some kind of sense of what is secular, which is basically an idea where you can have people with differing opinions, different backgrounds, different likes, still be able to engage in things like commerce, even though they might be fundamentally at odds in other areas of their life. But as long as it's within their private spheres, they can still coexist peacefully. And this notion is directly in opposition to being a Christian.
To be honest, Jefferson, I don't know how much more I could add to that. That's a little frustrating. I wanted to showcase my expertise, but nailed it, bro.
Okay. Right. So, and now I think what he's going to do. So he's going to probably try to get into the moral standard thing, which again is irrelevant.
Oh, he is,
because appealing to some kind of universal moral standard is irrelevant to a libertarian.
The interesting everything about libertarianism is subjective. It is literally all of it. Its entire foundations are based on what you individually find valuable and worthwhile.
Yeah.
And that is
when it's applied. Yeah.
Yeah. It's you're right. It's in direct opposition to any of these ideas of God being some, objective standard for really anything.
At Repo Sam, someone should design a mascot for libertarianism. What animals would it be? Well, whatever you want.
A cat.
Provided you don't leave it on my lawn, Repo.
It's a cat.
Yeah.
It's a house cat.
Yeah.
Because they only care about themselves and nobody else matters.
And an outdoor cat at that. They come and go.
Right.
Yeah.
As they please, and fuck you, and
it's like a junky roommate that just shows up at the worst.
That was my first two roommates.
Because you can say personal freedom and responsibility all you want, but if you don't have an objective standard of what is actually right and wrong, you're just in a sea of confusion.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where
sea of confusion, aka libertarianism, and they embrace the madness.
They're about the madness.
Yeah, they don't.
That's their thing.
Yeah, you can live your super cleaned up, abstemious lifestyle over there. Meanwhile, I'm over here every weekend getting drunk on moonshine and blowing up blocks of tannerite in my back 40.
Exactly.
and God bless America for it. Sorry.
I mean, look, those things are fine as long as you're not fucking with anybody else. I don't really care. You know, blow up whatever you want in your backyard.
Don't use the tannerite. On on standing buildings, unless you're working
right.
construction. I don't know.
Right. But yeah,
Libertarianism will always just fall dead.
So do you think that, because I'm assuming that, correct me if I'm wrong, you want to see America's law based on a Christian system of law and justice, of what you perceive to be law and justice, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm a non-Christian,
yeah,
do you think I should have to live under the guidelines of a Christian morality if I don't believe in it?
Well, it's a good question, and I think that if we were to ask it the other way, same assumptions, we would see that we're talking about the same thing. So, for example, I know that you're not a believer, not a Christian, but you would probably want more of a secular society, right? Democracy. That would
I prefer democracy
right
to a theological law and justice system. Yeah.
Right, but the thing I would point to is that every system is a theocracy. Every system is a theocracy. So, for example,
elements of it.
Yeah,
I am disturbed by this take.
Right. Yeah. This is when things are going to jump off. And here's what's going to happen. So I'll make this point now, and then let him, and then play the rest of this. So he's going to do one of my favorite things where they're going to compare. Durbin is going to do this thing about, and I know he's going to do this because I can read minds. It's going to be about the difference between Christianity versus secularism, right? And this will be one of those things where he says, okay, well, it's those two things are in opposition. That only applies to people in the Christian mindset and only to a particular bent. Because the problem is, the way these guys present secularism, they present it as if it excludes Christianity. But that's not the scary thing about secularism to Christians. And as a former Christian, I know better. The scary thing about secularism is that it is inherently inclusive. It doesn't exclude anything. It welcomes in everything, including Christianity, which means that in a secular viewpoint, Christianity is no longer special, which removes its exclusivity. And since Christianity is by definition exclusive, it is not compatible with secularism. So these guys would be consistent if they were more honest about what they were trying to say. This idea where they're like, Christianity is actually where we get this live and let live libertarian kind of mindset. It absolutely is not. You get that from a secular understanding of allowing all these different worldviews and different lifestyles and backgrounds and faith traditions to coexist. You do not get that with Christianity. Christianity does not inform them.
Well, and an interesting thing about that, because you get a lot of these people, of course, talking about, the country is founded as a Christian nation, which of course it was not. But more importantly, the argument often against that is that most of the founders were not Christians. That's also not true. Only about a third of the founders were not Christian. All of them, though, recognized that, that's my faith. But since most of them were coming from England that had just recently experienced a religious civil war, they were like, maybe we should just not do that. And so even those that were Christian, which were the majority, they said, no, that turns out bad in the long run and affects people's ability to worship.
Yeah. And I think that when these guys, and I'm sure Durbin is probably one of these founding father kind of myth guys, no, it's grounded in this. I mean, he's even starting to get into that language. Like, well, all governments are really theocracies if you stop and think about it, because if it weren't for some theological perspective, you'd have no grounding for morality, and then you'd have no grounding for rules and laws. The only problem with that is that you end up having less grounding, because if you can't establish the being that is declaring things to be right and wrong, and a competing viewpoint comes along and says the same thing, you're automatically going to be at loggerheads, and then you end up having to look for an alternative, which is something more like secularism, where you try to find the common denominator and then flesh that out as best you can philosophically, and then use that to ground your rules and laws. Because if you try to do it just from some kind of theocratic decree, you're going to miss people. And that's a good way to get...
You're going to miss a lot of people.
Yeah. And not only that, not only does it not apply to people, you end up getting into a situation where not only do you anger a lot of people, you end up disenfranchising a shitload of people, but then you have other people who maybe don't feel particularly disenfranchised. They just check out. They do what he thinks Washington and Colorado do to the federal government. Oh, you've declared that because your God says that's right. No, I don't believe in a God that believes that's right and wrong, so I don't have to do that. You also said you're a libertarian, and as a libertarian, you should respect my right to also do whatever the heck I want. So pardon me while I jump into this orgy, like, and you can't say that
they're so fun.
I mean, he can say, like, from his Christian perspective, well, I think that that's objectively wrong. Cool. But you can't pass a law against it because you're also a libertarian. Remember that? Live and let live. Remember that part? Right. Let me go to hell the way I want to, Yeah, these guys are really...
I literally, this thought just came to me. What if we just said, hey, Congress people, you don't get to make a law that can't affect you or that you wouldn't have been affected by?
A law against a law? I don't know. I think Republicans are trying to do that in some cases, where it's like, what we're going to do is pass a law to prevent the government from passing laws.
If you couldn't have an abortion or you never have had one, you don't get a rule on whether or not it's legal.
Oh, yeah. If it doesn't apply to you. Yeah.
Right? It's never going to affect you. Well, then shut up.
Yeah, I mean, in one avenue, I think that's good. But in the other avenue, I know too many people that I care about that I know it will affect. And I would want to be on that side of it because it's like, no, if I'm going to make the argument, because I do believe in reproductive rights, I believe in birth control, scientifically grounded birth control, then yeah, I'm gonna fight for that because I've got a mom and a sister, and and
then as I think of it, here in Colorado, Lauren Boebert is from the state, and I don't want her making those decisions for anybody.
Exactly. And somebody commented on the blurry laptop in the corner. Yeah, I think it's funny because they've got it there, and occasionally they'll pan out so you can see the guy sitting in front of that computer, but then the blur moves with the camera because it's locked in place, and you can see what's on the screen, and then they adjust it back. So yeah, I don't know what's on that particular laptop that they don't want you to see, but
yeah, it's hard to see.
I'm gonna guess it's Pornhub, but that's just me.
I mean, look, if there's anything good and right in the world, it should be.
He's just updating his OnlyFans channel.
I mean, everybody does it.
Ideas of Christianity, Islam, whatever, just from years and years of, and they were like the powerhouses politically for so many years.
Yeah.
And they're going to have certain parts of their theology or their philosophical thought that we're going to take, like, don't kill people. Yeah, we'll have that.
We'll take that. Yeah.
Don't steal. Yeah, we'll have a bit of that too.
That, yes.
You know what I'm saying? So,
right.
We are going to take certain elements of that because there is
can't live without it.
Yeah, there is a certain moral standard that I think even an atheist and a Christian would share. Mm-hmm. I think if you get two decent people who are Christian and one's atheist, and you say, what do you think about murder? Or what do you think about, a robbery? You probably both agree we don't like it, right? But it's it's the other things, because there's other nuances.
Right.
I think that people would disagree on.
Of course,
probably wouldn't want to live under.
So what's interesting is that the way that you illustrated that is actually really interesting. You talk about Christians and atheists, and even atheists borrowing, saying, "I like that from the Christian worldview. We'll keep that. We'll agree on that." What I would point to is that the atheist is being.
Nobody is borrowing "Don't kill me" from the Christian worldview.
Right.
Like that's been around for a while.
Well, the other thing too, they're already starting to talk past each other because Jelani brought this up, right? Saying, oh, okay, well, somebody's going to look at this and say like, oh, okay, thou shalt not kill or whatever. Yeah, I'll have that. I'll take that over. Right. But the problem when you're discussing this kind of thing with somebody like Durbin is that Durbin is going to take that inch and then, and run a mile with it, right? And he's going to be like, okay, so what you're actually acknowledging at this point is that they're borrowing from the Christian worldview and they're stealing that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to say "thou shalt not kill." Well, there's an interesting way of putting this for somebody like Jeff Durbin. Think of it this way: if you're in an early society and you're trying to rule a group of people, and you're coming up with laws and ideas that you think will make things work better for people. and some of them include some things that some of your unrulier types may not agree to, like don't kill, don't rape, don't steal. And they're like, well, I like killing, raping, and stealing. Well, the easiest way to get everybody in line with that is to say, well, the reason, they're like, who the hell do you think you are telling me what I can and can't do? That's the
Right, they're
libertarian
libertarians.
response. The response to the superstitious libertarian is, oh, I'm not saying this. He is, and you point towards the sky, or you point at the burning bush, or you point at
Right.
the bull statue, or something.
And you're
like that.
appealing to consequences at that point.
Yeah, if you don't do what it says, it'll get you. If you do what it says, you'll get you don't get to rape anymore, but you can have multiple wives, let's say.
Right. And they all have to do everything you say, and I mean everything. Well,
right.
Except butt stuff.
Just over the pants kind of crotch stuff.
Right.
But you any of this kind of stuff, that you immediately get into this kind of horse trading and carrots and sticks kind of stuff. And then now you've got the beginnings of political philosophy and theology. And it turns out that theology was just there to grease the wheels for developing the political philosophy. And then you end up getting the implications that end up coming with that. Like, wait a minute.
Much as I hate to say it, Marx was right about that.
Yeah, because the problem is,
I mean,
oh, who the hell do you think you are telling me what I can do? Oh, it's not me, said the high priest. It's the God that created all of us. Then you get that one guy like, who the hell does that thing think he is? And if he bleeds, can we kill it? Right? You get that one psycho in the group, that gets a little wild-eyed, like, oh,
well, the funny thing is, in Christianity, turns out it bleeds and we can kill it. Like,
right.
All right, problem solved.
And it turns out it was necessary for his redemptive plan for man.
Right. Oh, he had to. Okay, well,
it was a hell of a
works
twist.
Out pretty good.
Oh, the Romans murdered him. Yeah, but that was his plan. What a twist!
Right. Even Shyamalan couldn't have come up with that twist.
Nope, couldn't see it coming. Okay, so I think they're getting close to, the last twist, and then I think I can probably wrap this up, because the one guy's going to pipe in with something that is a massive problem.
Consistent at that point, because he has to borrow capital from the Christian worldview in order to live in a just society, an ordered world. But the atheist is living inconsistently with his own principles. So, for example, when the atheist says, I think it's absolutely wrong in society to murder and to rape, what I would say is that comports with Christianity.
So are we going along the perspective here that Christianity owns morality then?
That Christianity can justify moral appeals, objective moral appeals.
But then it sounds like that we're saying that Christianity is the arbiter of morality.
Well, I'll say it this way, give you something to shoot at.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I would say is that the Christian says, say, rape and murder are absolutely wrong. And the Christian has a basis to say that. We believe that we're in the image of God. God has spoken on rape.
That's not, he can say it's a basis, but it doesn't ground it.
Rape and murder, he condemns it, he calls it what it is, and he says you're not to do it. That's a certain claim from God. Now, so when I say as a Christian, you're not to rape and to murder, I have a worldview that makes sense of that. But let's take, for example, the atheist. The atheist says, I believe that it's wrong to rape and murder as well. Yeah. I can ask the atheist, well, how do you justify that claim? Because you believe you live in a universe that's time and chance acting on matter, that your ancestors were fish, and that there is no objective morality.
But there's a bunch
because I don't want to be murdered.
That's simple enough.
Is, iffy, but murder especially.
The idea that he lives in a world that doesn't involve time and chance, that was created by a God, I think is charming, because it's like, of course, time and chance were invented by God. And the fact that we have limited epistemological faculties means chance comes into play, and he's a spaceless, timeless being that created space and time. So, according to the Christian worldview,
well, at least chance, as far as we can tell.
The idea that objective morality isn't something that atheists believe in is also, that's just projection. Well, not really projection, but it's just a stereotype. Like there
are plenty of atheist moral realists.
Lots of them, and a lot of philosophers who identify as atheists. More of them are objective, believe in some kind of objective morality. It's just a little bit more nuanced than what he's talking about. And his version of morality is not objective. It's super subjective. It's just the decree of a God. And you can always roll it back to like, okay, Durbin can't demonstrate at any point during this thing, like, well, I can make appeals to this because it's part of the Christian worldview. Cool. So what you can tell me is that other Christians have said that God thinks this, and therefore they think that. Can you point out when God told you directly, or have you just heard this from other believers? Because if all
Exactly.
you've ever done is hear it from other believers, then it's just an infinite regress problem that you now have. Because now it just goes back to every believer until it
Well, it
terminates.
goes.
God that they claimed existed, but you don't know and you can't demonstrate. So now you have
Well,
the problem.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's still. You're right. It's an infinite regress of so and so said so. Well, who told them? How do they know?
Yeah. Yeah. Remember, just so many Christian tropes, so little time. Start stringing them together. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, did we catch it? So the objective morality, random chance, and what was the other one? You believe that it's just like matter, like it's just incidental matter or whatever. Like, well, it could be incidentally matter, but it is that if God created it. Because
Right.
if that is how it appears to be, that's also part of general revelation. So I like how these guys do the well. For you, it's just that. Yeah, that's how it's been
It
revealed.
is what God just happened to make it.
Yeah.
Just because.
See, so the atheist has to borrow from the Christian worldview to make sense of his own.
But if we go to countries where they don't have Christianity,
Mhm.
like they're not all raping and murdering each other. Do you know what I mean? Though it's like there is some inbuilt morality
Because they're in the image of God. We're all in the image of the same God.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is so the Christian and the atheist, if we're going along that perspective, you say that that one can justify the claim and one can't.
That's right.
Is what I'm saying to you is that you're not born with the innate idea saying like if it wasn't written in your text that you would commit the crime because you had no more back into it. Just what I'm saying, because there's other countries where if we go to like
This is an interesting thing. So it should follow that if you're not following that, your morality slips away, but you don't see that. Right. And this is where I think somebody like Durbin ends up having to make the claim like, well, what's going to happen here is you can make these claims, you just can't ground them. So atheists make the claim that rape is wrong and murder is wrong and this is wrong and that's bad, but they can't ground it. All right. We can because
But how on earth do we have laws in a secular society then?
Right, especially in a libertarian sense, where some people can, we can agree to disagree, but the one thing we're not going to agree to disagree on is whether or not you can take my property or take my wife. You can't do that, or take my life.
Like the middle of
Papua New Guinea.
Yeah, and they've never heard of Christianity.
They never heard of Jesus.
They're not raping and murdering each other because
they do. They do rape and murder.
But so do Christians. Like I think that's interesting. Oh well, if you go to Papua New Guinea, you still have crime. Yeah, you still have it amongst Christians too. In fact, I think when polled, the vast majority of inmates in the American prison system are white men from the South who are Christians.
And likely also rapists.
So it's clearly happening amongst Bible-believing men here.
Yeah.
It's happening amongst Christians.
I'm sure there is.
So the question is
a percentage.
The question is, and here's the rub.
But it's not enough to then say that it's not. I don't think it's enough of a percentage to then say, oh, it's because
here's the rub though.
They do it.
Those pagans, polytheists in Papua New Guinea, they can't justify. Yeah, they can't justify the condemnation of rape and murder that takes place in their society. Because they're in the image of God and we're all in the image of the same God, we all know God in our heart of hearts. And we all have his law written within us. This is why atheists and Christians can look across the aisle and say that rape was wrong. But only the Christian has a worldview that can make sense of what they're saying. The atheist can say that's absolutely wrong. And if you really ask them, was it really absolutely wrong? They'll say, well, no, not absolutely wrong. It's all subjective.
What the hell does what does absolutely have to do with it? That just means, are you certain that it's wrong? Like, I mean, that's one of those things where it's like, do you feel that it's totally wrong? Well, I guess maybe not, but right. Like,
yeah, because ultimately they're going to come to some Matt Slick kind of ridiculous hypothetical situation where, if morality is just based on well-being, then, I'm sure you've heard his woman in a coma hypothetical.
Yeah.
Right? Where it's like, okay, fine, except that's not a thing that can happen. Like, yeah, cool, it's an impossible hypothetical. So what?
Yeah, and it gets into the nature of mind and subjective experience quite a bit. But yeah,
Sure.
When they kind of entertain these notions, that you get like, well, is it certainly the case that it's wrong? Like, well, first of all, you really do have to ground what you mean by this. I would ask him back, well, is it absolutely the case that abortion is slaughter? is murder.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, absolutely. It's absolutely the case. Really. Christian mom, 3rd trimester pregnancy, doctors are telling her, we need to terminate the pregnancy and perform a D&E or you're going to die. And if you think that you're going to like die for the life of your child, here's what your child is. And it's, having seizures, which are going to complicate the pregnancy for the reasons that's going to kill you. So
either, well, or even this, we can perform that late term abortion and you'll live, but the fetus will die, or you can both die.
Right.
Now which one is slaughter?
Right. So yeah, when they do things like this, and now I know that one of the things would be like, oh well, you're arguing one of those the rare cases. You're trying to make the argument for the outlier. Well, the reason for doing that is so that we can roll these guys back in, because I want to have a conversation with somebody like Jeff Durbin and get him to commit to elective abortion, which is just birth control. Like, hey, I don't want to talk about these outlier cases. I think maybe a lot of Christians, they do think that those medical procedures should be available for doctors to do that to save the life of the mother. Or maybe and there are a lot of Christians that are like, oh yeah, no, rape, incest, those should be provisions too. So in those cases, it's just elective abortion. So what you're talking about then is you have a problem with birth control. Now that we've got that settled and we're talking about elective abortion procedures as a product of family planning and birth control, now make your case. Now that you're no longer hyperventilating about slaughter and murder and the Holocaust and all this other crap. Now we're just talking about birth control. So tell me again
why women can't that way.
Yeah, but that's the way we should. Now you tell me how you're going to tell the entire population of the country and the world, because Christianity is obviously global. You tell these women that you're not comfortable with them having this, and that's reason enough for them to be denied it in all circumstances. Go, make your case. Oh, and remember,
wouldn't it be cool if you could say that about AR-15s? Like, I'm not comfortable with you having that, therefore.
Yeah, and I think Gavin Newsom was they were trying to push a law in California that would allow people to sue gun owners the same way that people can sue abortion providers. You could sue. So if you found out that somebody shot up a place, there was a mass shooting in California, and you find out where the gun was purchased, you as a private citizen, just like a private citizen can sue the abortion provider or the cab driver or the friend that helped the person. You can't go after the woman because that's her right. They recognize that. But you can go after anybody that helps facilitate the process and sue her as a private citizen. They're like, okay, well, we'll just do this. If you find out about a mass shooting and you know where that gun was sold, you as a private citizen, you can go and sue that person for selling that gun to that lunatic, and we'll back you.
Right.
Same grounding, right? And it's
exactly
just as bad an argument, but it's like, well, if it's good in this case, it should apply here, and if it doesn't, maybe you ought to revisit it. But okay, I think we're getting
they point to the outliers, like these women go out and get abortions, like they get their nails done, and it's like, okay, but guess who I don't want to have raising kids?
Exactly. Well, and not only that, the idea, like, well, these women are going out and doing this thing, and then insert some common thing, like, oh, like, you mean like buying condoms, which is what you were supposed to do. You were supposed to be using protection because you're the one that can get someone pregnant. So you were supposed to be buying Jimmy hats and making sure they're not expired and making sure that they work and making sure you know how to fucking use them. You're the one that's supposed to be practicing sexual hygiene. But since we can't depend on men to do that, the onus is put on the woman. And if she gets into circumstances where she's dealing with some fucking scug that is just disgusting and doesn't buy condoms and can't be bothered with it because they don't feel right, she's now in a position where she might have to take actions after the fact. And I guess she's just going to have to put up and shut up. If Durbin has his way, she just has to deal with that. So the only thing separating, so basically women are in a world where it's just up to men to do the right thing, which we know doesn't work, right? But this is
you can't just leave it up to individuals all the time,
right? And and the fact is, these guys always they're just as bad, I think, as the rest of society at pushing this stuff onto women. Like, they want to be involved in this conversation and say, no, women shouldn't be doing birth control in these ways. Really, how should they be doing them? Well, maybe maybe they should just get married young and then only have sex with their husbands. Cool. They're not doing that. The men aren't doing that. So
and they're not gonna.
And no one's going
and
to
they
do
never
that.
have.
Like the one thing that's never brought up is what we need to make sure is that sex ed is mandatory, and that guys especially know that their responsibility first and foremost is to make sure that they have protection. That's not the emphasis. The emphasis ends up coming on what's a girl to do in these. Yeah.
I think if you taught them like, hey, listen, buddy, as soon as your sperm fertilizes the egg, you're on the hook, and you don't have anything to say about it.
Which could end up being the implication for this down the road. And some of these guys have actually argued for that. If you ask them like, okay, well, if it's if it's life at conception, why isn't it life in the tube? You know, for lack of a better expression, why isn't it life in the sack? You know, they don't have.
Well, because it's only half the gene, the genome. But
then all of a sudden,
what about an ectopic pregnancy? Like, what are you supposed to do? It's not gonna go to term. Right. That is not gonna happen. But if you leave it alone, it is going to kill the mother. Like, this is exactly what's going to happen.
That's the kind of determinism that I think both sides can bank on.
Right.
There's no absolute moral oughts. I'll give you Dawkins' statement. Dawkins, in his book, River Out of Eden, says Richard Dawkins.
The atheist,
he says that in River Out of Eden, he said that there's ultimately cosmic indifference. He says there is no good, there is no evil. There's no good, there is no evil. Now that's him being a consistent atheist at the moment, but he won't live that way. Because
it's interesting that he left out the fact that that's from the perspective of the cosmos, right? I believe he goes on to talk about the good and evil that we decide upon. But I don't want to read into a statement taken out of context if I'm only going to take it out of context further. But that already sounds very, very cherry picked. So
it absolutely is.
In order to live and breathe and move in this world, he has to borrow from God, borrow capital from the Christian worldview in order to make sense of his world. He'll say there's no absolute morals, but then he'll live in such a way as there actually are. So he'll live like a Christian, like an image bearer of God, but he'll deny it with his profession of atheism. So what's interesting here in terms of like someone says, really? You want a society where people all love Jesus and they all they all believe that loving God and loving neighbor are the most important thing? You want a society that actually points to God's laws of standards of justice? I would say absolutely, but so does the atheist. The atheist also wants his ultimate. So for example, let's ask it the other way. You asked a moment ago about, you really want people to, like me as a secularist, not like to live in a Christian society? I would say, well, I'm now a Christian living in a secular society. And it's being demanded of me that I follow secular law and Demas. I follow Demas's rule as the ultimate. And Demas right now says that it's perfectly acceptable to murder your child in the womb.
Okay, there's a million things wrong with everything that he's saying there. And again, this gets to this distinction with secularism and like, well, the secular society is placing this demand upon me. No, it's not. The demand that secular society is placing on everyone is that you are going to try to coexist with people as best you can. There are certain spheres of your life that you can engage in that the government really can't interfere with, right? And in those places, you can be as weird and racist and paranoid and bigoted, right? I mean, that seems to be the philosophy behind it. But in terms of the rest of this stuff, like when you go out and engage in the rest of society, there are certain things that you kind of have to you don't have to like it, right? You just have to be able to like in an adult fashion acknowledge that other people live this way, and whether you agree with it or not, they have the right to do that. You know, within their rights of privacy, their rights of expression, whatever, right? And part of like mapping out a society that's civil is figuring out how to, demark those. So yeah, he's already that, but this whole the whinging that Christians are like, oh, the secularism is beating us up. The only reason that Christians have not been run out of this country on boats is because there's a secular society that accepts their craziness. If there was no secular society and they were just enforcing what they want, which is a theocratic rule, he's trying to present this sort of like, oh, Jamali, no, it's kind and loving, and trust me, you want it. It's a kinder, gentler theocracy. It's still a theocracy, and it's still autocratic. And if they had that, as soon as they got it, the group that would suffer the most from a Christian autocracy? Other Christians. The other Christians that don't theologically or ideologically line up with whichever Christian group is in power. Because not only are they not towing the line, they're uniquely traitors to the faith. So they're the first ones to get purified. So the reason secular society is good is because it allows a group like Christians to grow and express themselves in different ways. It allows for Wesleyans and Calvinists and Arminians and whatever, you know.
And those Catholics.
And them too, yeah. But the first thing,
no, again, the civics teacher in me, when he's talking about rights and, you know, following laws, it irks me, because he's literally saying, why should you be legally allowed to do X, and saying that deprives me of the right to prevent you from doing that. Right?
Exactly.
It's not understanding the difference between positive and negative rights.
Yes.
Right? You have a right to do X. You don't have a right to do Y. Like to quote Darth, it's not rocket surgery. But yeah, it's just like it's this very fundamental misunderstanding of what that means. And you're right as far as the different denominations of Christianity, because again, the founders were literally just coming from a religious civil war between Christians. And not long before that, there was another religious war throughout Europe that killed more people than the plague.
Right. And this is like the secular society that these guys bemoan is precisely the reason that Durbin has a popular YouTube channel. It's the reason they can get into these ecumenical and ideological and political discussions, because if they ran things their way, when they allow their entailments and their ideology and their theology to carry them usually way out of whack, they end up making an environment that's not only hostile to all of their enemies, but it's hostile to themselves.
Right.
They've done this before, and they basically cancel themselves out. A secular society is what allows them to grow. And they're sitting here like, oh, but in a secular society, I'm being forced to just accept this stuff and not try to, like, okay, so what you're saying is in cancel culture, you don't have the authority to cancel harder?
Pretty much. And more importantly, look, all these people pushing for, a theocratic autocracy, right? If you're not Catholic and you're pushing for that, you're an idiot.
Right. And not only that, but like, yeah, especially if you're one of these solo scriptura types, you know, like the Catholic Church can kind of pull, like they did it. They had the organization, they had the logistics, they could get that to work out. And even they had to deal with the Reformation and schisms and heretics. And it's like, so
how do you think Westboro Baptist Church is going to manage?
Yeah, how are the thousands of Protestant denominations in the United States going to unite? Like, they're just going to unite, like, oh, well, it's an in-house debate. It's like, okay, so you imagine a Christian Washington, D.C., and it's just populated by representatives of all these denominations. And the front they put out to everybody on TV is that they're all working in concert to make sure that this is a shining city on a hill, a country made for God. In the background, they're all assassinating each other, you know, over bits of scripture and interpretations. It's like it would be a cesspit of corruption, backbiting. And if they don't, I know in their minds they're like, no, the Holy Spirit would guide us. Like, I've watched you assholes for years and in multiple denominations time after time rip into each other like starving dogs over a chicken wing, and that's in a denomination, and you're barking at each other over something like who runs the potluck or who arranges the bake sale, and you guys think that you could run a country?
Can you imagine trying to get like Methodists, Seventh-day Adventists, and Southern Baptists to agree on how to run a Christian theocracy?
Yeah.
Like, you might as well get Catholics and Muslims to agree. Like, it's madness. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and all of that was to say that like this secular stuff, secular society, why can't I cancel the hardest? I deserve the veto hammer. I'm voting people off the island. Like, the reason that you haven't been voted off the island is because secularism has allowed you to stay. right?
Right.
People have
Because you're the asshole that nobody wants around.
Right. Everybody tolerates everybody else's crazy religious shtick. And yeah, you sitting there and like, no, you're borrowing from my worldview. Like, do you know what worldview you're borrowing from? The secular one that is basically giving you this entitled attitude that you want to take the podium and then from the podium say that you have the right to tell others they don't ever get to take the podium. That makes you a fucking fascist.
And we secularists are so generous that we allow you to say that stupid shit.
The ACLU will legally defend you.
Well, not anymore, but
yeah, maybe not so much anymore, but they used to.
Yeah.
Anyway, here we go.
I used to give money to them.
So did I. So I think they're getting close here. I think Jelani's going to ask him the question, right? Like, nobody's making you. I think that's what he's going to get to.
So I'm now, as a Christian, being asked to submit to the ultimate of our current system, and that's a secular system. Everybody has an ultimate.
Well, I mean, the only flaw I see in that is that you're not told you have to. So you're not told you have to have an abortion. Just what I'm saying though, like no one's telling you like, hey, you better go have an abortion. You know
But in China they do.
Yeah, but that's that. I mean, China has many problems. We're not talking about a dictatorship. We're talking about it's somewhat of a democracy. And we can get into a China debate.
Can I ask you one question?
They're
Trying
to tell us we have to perform gay weddings or bake a
Christian
cake for a
fundamentalist
gay wedding.
Lawmakers, by the way, really want us to have the same labor laws as China.
They do.
So maybe we shouldn't go there.
Right. Also, what he just said. This is my final point. What he just said there is that's the last point, and I think he's going to actually say. I think Jelani even kind of concedes it.
Mm-hmm. And you agree with that?
No, we wouldn't. But that's the same principle, the same discussion.
Fair enough.
It's not fair enough. I'd push back on Jelani right there because he's like, fair enough. So he's like, the government is not telling you have to have an abortion, right? Oh, China is. Okay, that has nothing to do with this. And he's like, oh, but the government is telling you have to make a cake for gay people. And here's where I'm going to go off into a little bit of diatribe. I beg your pardon, Wilberforce.
Please do. That cocksucker's from my state. Like, so very many crazy assholes.
Here's my biggest issue with this. So there is a real problem that people have understanding this, and they don't. They claim they do. They want to make it more complicated than it really is, but they get this. And I'm gonna make a thought experiment here, and this is how it works. Let's say you as an individual decide you do not like people named Kevin, and you have forbidden anyone named Kevin from coming into your house. Right? That's just a thing that you do, right? Now, as far as the government goes, a government representative cannot come over to your house and tell you that you must allow anyone named Kevin in. They can't do that. They have no grounds to do that. That's not a thing. They wouldn't do that. They can't do that. It's never happening. A couple years go by and you're living your life and you're saving your money and you're developing your irrational hatred towards all people named Kevin. And then you decide to open a bakery, and you open a bakery and you decide you go through all of the procedures to get this place going. You get the licensing, you get the tax ID, you got the capital, you got the storefront, you get it all set up. But then you decide that the one thing about the bakery that you have now established that you really want to set apart is that it reflect your views on society. One of which is that societies would be better off with no Kevins, right? So you put a sign up in the front of your bakery that says no Kevins on it. And then the rest of the town now takes issue with the fact that this bakery has shown up that is proudly advertising their anti-Kevin bias. This is getting weird now. Now, what these guys are going to want to say is, here's the problem, right? Like, if I own this company and I own this place, you can't tell me what I can and can't do. Cool. Here's what's wrong with that. The man that runs this bakery, he's dealing with the city, and there's a little bit of controversies going on about his no Kevin policy. One day, an elderly woman, it's in the winter, let's say this place is in Colorado, why not? It's a little icy on the sidewalk. She slips, falls, and breaks her hip. She then sues Kevin, right? Kevin has an accountant and has a lawyer. And most importantly, here's where things really... Now, not sues Kevin. She sues the owner. I'm sorry. She sues the owner of the No Kevin Bakery. And he goes to his attorney, right? And he gets a lawyer. And they very easily point out, well, here's the thing. There's a reason that you have liability insurance. She's actually suing the legal entity that is your business, the No Kevin's Bakery. She's not suing you. And okay. Now, all of a sudden, he understands the legal distinction between himself as a citizen and his business as a legal business entity, one licensed by the state, one with a federal tax ID, one that accepts federal currency in exchange for services. All of this stuff now, oh, okay, I get it now. So these guys usually want to have this kind of debate in these parameters where this is the trick for Christian nationalists. What do they want? Everything. And this guy's laying this out there. Aha, Jelani, you're wrong. If they're saying, they're not telling me that I have to have an abortion, but they are telling me I have to provide a cake to some LGBTQ couple, and I fundamentally disagree with that. They didn't tell you had to do it. They told your company that your company can't refuse them service for prejudices you as a citizen hold. That's the fucking argument. And that's the way you were supposed to approach it. And you understood the distinction when it was time for you to dodge the liability that was going to be incurred by the old lady's broken
hip. Which is the whole reason you created an LLC or whatever in the first place.
Precisely. You weren't going out there and selling cupcakes directly from a box in your hands or out of the back of your car. You did it with a business. So there's a legal entity separate from you. And if anything happens to the business, it's separate from your wealth, your house, your goods, and your family. You can bounce back from that business's failure. It's not you taking the hit. It's the business as an entity taking a hit. They get it then they all about the guy that runs Hobby Lobby, the CEO for that, was making arguments like this to the Supreme Court, and some of them, I swear to God, bought the simplistic shit. Like, here's the thing: when I pay,
they were motivated.
They were. When I buy a contract from this company and they provide healthcare to my employee and that service does things that I don't want, that's the same as me paying for the service that I find morally reprehensible. It's like, how did you even get there? First of all, by that logic, if I should be able to sue you, the CEO of Hobby Lobby, because one of your employees went out with money they earned from the job working at one of your stores, got drunk, and hit someone that I know and love with their car. Now, you're on the hook for that. Do you agree with that? Well, no. That's their money now. How am I liable for that? Exactly. Yeah. That's money that came from the corporation and was paid to them for services rendered. It was for their labor. It's all abstracted out that way. It has nothing to do with you. Like, these guys amaze me. It amazes me. They will dodge liability left, right, and center. And then all of a sudden, the government's out here to tell me what I can and can't do. No, if you want the benefits of being a separate government entity, like a business, you need to accept the responsibilities and the entailments that come with that. Otherwise, you need to get out of that business.
Well, you have to understand, though, Jefferson, with the amount of special pleading that they do, in theology or arguments about that, why would they not say, well, yeah, but it's different for me because reasons?
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, that's really all it comes down to. And it is nothing but that. What I would really like to do is organize some kind of thing. Being in Colorado, I'm not all that far from Jack Phillips Bakery. I want to have 100 people a day go in and order wedding cakes undecorated, right? Or with basic decoration, and then just put the little figurine of a gay couple on top themselves. Right. And then post those pictures to, the bakery's website.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and the fun thing to do would be to what I always wanted to do is do a video. You go into one of those facilities, right? You get a really attractive guy and a really attractive woman, right? And you do them up as Ken and Barbie as you can, and you send them in there, and especially the woman in question in Colorado, because she actually told an audience at CPAC that she lives vicariously through the women that show up because it's their greatest day, and they're a princess, and she wants to be part of helping them feel like a princess on the greatest day. That's when they're going to marry their Prince Charming. So you send in two people that look like Prince Charming and fucking Cinderella, and they get the cake and everything, and then you send them out, and then you do an entire like an OnlyFans channel of them eating that thing in an orgy with all of their polyamorous wedding honeymoon.
Yeah, I would absolutely love that. Honestly, the fact that anybody's getting married in the first place is offensive, but that's only because I've done it enough times that it's a terrible, terrible idea.
But it's
But no,
so much of this stuff is informed by just their own superficiality. If a couple walked in, they would think, and it's like, okay, yeah, we're getting married. Like, okay, not and they're, oh, well, I'm so happy for it. I'm like, did you think to ask to whom they were getting married? You just assumed that you saw a man and a woman, and the way they're dressed and comport themselves. You're just going to assume that they're cisgender, hetero, like they don't have an open marriage. Are you sure you don't want to give them a questionnaire and find out like what they've got going? Because do you really want your cake going to these two people who are actually bisexual? One of them's pan, and they've got multiple sexual partners, and they engage in all sorts of different things.
And did you know that they're furries too?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, shouldn't you? I mean, and if you're going to put this much on these customers, shouldn't you? I mean, it just seems like it would only be fair to make them fill out a waiver in a series of questionnaires. But you don't do that. You judge them based, like when it was a gay couple that walked in there holding hands and everything, her reaction was, ew, yuck, that's not of the Bible, which is like, I got news for you. I think a lot of those stories were probably going on in the Bible, or at least during Bible times.
Well, that leavened bread you're serving as cake is problematic.
Yeah. It's, I mean, it's just it's mind-boggling to me to watch, and I think in some people's cases, I think to kind of wrap this up, the reason I wanted to point those out was because this is just evidence. I mean, and this is a 5-year-old video. This really, I don't think this is improved, of just the amount of wordage, the viper vocabulary. And some of this comes from other people. This has been snuck into Christian discourse, and they accept it. It gets passed on, and they don't really take it, and they don't really think through it. So some of it becomes kind of reflexive. It's just a reflex when they're dealing with a non-believer or something like that. But the thing that bothered me the most about when I was a believer was that I would talk to other Christians, and I would ask them to really think through stuff, because I would have problems with discussions like this, and they wouldn't do it. They would just continue in like the trademark cliche crap, and I'm like, you got to quit doing this. And then it was 10 years later, 5-10 years later, I was out of the faith. That was really kind of what was pushing me forward.
And that reaction probably sped you along that path.
Yeah, I remember at one point in college where I was, a guy who was like, oh, well, he was one of these campus crusaders, and he was an RA, and when he found out that I was raised in church, he said, oh, well, I didn't know that you were a brother in Christ. And it's the way that he said it, and I bristled. I was like, and I told him, I'm like, I wouldn't go that far. He's like, well, don't you believe in God? I'm like, yeah, I believe in God. He's like, well, do you believe that you believe in Jesus Christ? I'm like, yeah, basically, yeah. He's like, well, then you're a brother in Christ, man. I'm like, you don't say it again. It was just I didn't want to be part of the fraternity anymore. And that was God, like that was 8 years away before I really, totally deconverted. The culture of it and everything, I'd already had a belly full of it. I'm like, nope, I don't want the ring. I don't want the necklace. I don't want the secret handshake. I don't want any of it. I don't want, you guys are like, I've been through 4 churches, well, 5, I think, growing up, 2 influential ones in my life, and watched them both self-destruct. I'm like, you guys aren't built to last. If anything, you're built to break. So,
that said, Jefferson, and this is my last point, I definitely do not want to get rid of churches, even the super repressive ones, solely because when I was in high school, my brother and I joined a church youth group, solely because it was full of sexually repressed teenage girls. And that was a wonderful, wonderful experience, having nothing to do with Jesus. And we need to keep that going. That needs to be a thing that happens regularly. How else can we introduce people to the world of debauchery and sin? They have to learn somehow.
You got to ease your way into it. You don't just want to go hardcore, and you don't want to do it when you're older. That's how you break a hip.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Do it when you're young and lithe and impressionable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, with that said, Wilberforce, thanks for joining me. Thanks for the input.
Thanks for having me, Jefferson.
And yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up there. So that was the point of this whole thing. Thank you everybody that tuned in live to watch this, and anybody that does watch it after the fact. Just, I should have posted this warning at the beginning. This was me indulging the dopamine hit that all these bad Christian rhetorical statements triggered in my brain, and I just had to kind of get this out in order to vent. So thank you for letting me.
Many of them.
Yeah, and this is kind of where I stopped. I'm not going to do the second half, because I mean, there's still over 30 minutes left of this. The link for this is in the description of my video. It's down in the description. So if you do want to watch the rest of it, go right ahead. I won't blame you if you don't.
Come on, Jeff. We're halfway there. It's been 2 hours. Come on.
Yeah, 2 more hours. No, I'm going to end it there, because those were just, I mean, I have a feeling that those were their greatest hits. At this point, like, if this is the best they can do opening up, it's only going to get worse. And I don't know that I don't think my brain's got the gas. I don't think I can do it. So who knows?
Maybe there's a part 2 in the future somewhere.
That could be too. Yeah. If I'm a little nervous to watch on and see how many other bad points they're going to make. But yeah, so.
I hear you.
Well, with that said, I got to read this with the movie guy voice.
Read this with the movie guy voice.
There you go, AJ. I don't know if you wanted me
in a world.
In a world with $5. Thank you for that super chat, AJ. And yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up there. I will see you all later. I got a busy rest of the week coming up, but I hope I will be able to join in. Actually, tomorrow, I did promise, I don't know how many people follow him. Jackson Wheat is going to have a show on, I think it's at like 8 o'clock Eastern. I'm not sure. I've got to check. I'll be getting a link later on. I was invited last week, so I'll be joining that. It'll be with Peter, going to go for it. Aaron Ross, producer, Jackson Wheat, and there's going to be another guy there. I think also another guy from the Netherlands, like Peter. So it could be fun. So yeah, I'm planning on joining that one for the majority of that one. That's going to be tomorrow, Jackson Wheat's channel at some point. So if you're subscribed, keep an eye out for that. I'll probably tweet.
That'll be fun. Peter's gas.
Yeah, Peter's fun. So, and I don't know that I've ever talked to Jackson Wheat. I may have talked to him a few years ago, but it's been a while since I've seen one of his things. So I'm going to go on there. So if anybody's interested, look up Jackson Wheat, and yeah, I'll be there. Otherwise, I don't know what we're going to be. I think we're going to be making fun of Matt Powell. I think that's the topic. So
always a worthwhile project.
Yeah. I haven't done that in a while. Not since not since having a conversation with Knock, maybe Raging Atheist. So other than that, I don't know if I've got anything planned, but hopefully I can get something done on the weekend before Christmas comes around, because once the holidays hit, I will probably be AWOL. So, but Wilberforce, thanks again.
Well, you should be.
Yeah, I'm just going to be laying around eating holiday food and vegging out. So
thanks again for having me on.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for joining. And I'm going to play a little video here, and take care, everybody. And until next time, be good to each other.